the people, and I said this earlier, the people who give you the hardest feedback are usually the people who care the most. And Alan has an understanding of what success will take, and I trust in that. And you have to.
We get conditioned to think that a B or a C or a D is a bad thing, when in reality it's feedback that can be used to learn how to grow. See, when we succeed, we celebrate. When we fail, we contemplate.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another very special, as always, Next Level University live podcast, week number 71, Mirror Moments, How to Positively Receive Feedback. So, for those who are listening to this on replay, Alan was doing a little preamble explaining what we're going to talk about, and if you're trying to get to the next level, that's going to require next level feedback. It's going to require a lot of mirror moments, and if you know what to do with those mirror moments, it can really help you make progress. And if you don't know what to do, I feel like it can lead to a lot of pain, a lot of discouragement, and even more limiting beliefs.
I think a good analogy to kickstart here is video games. So I remember when I was young, I was in high school, and Halo came out. So Halo is a super famous Xbox game, and I remember my buddy and I, Nick, would literally play Halo on Legendary. And the truth of the matter is we weren't ready for that level. Legendary, there was easy, there was normal, there was hard, and there was Legendary. And so there were these checkpoints. And we had this one checkpoint that we just kept getting stuck at, and it took us hours and hours and hours. I think we ended up pulling almost an all-nighter just to get through the first level. The reason why is because we kept dying. So in life, when we try to get to the next level, we end up failing and we get pain a lot of times, and a lot of times we want to avoid that pain from then on, and so we never get to that next level. So a lot of us may be playing life on easy. Maybe we're playing on normal. Maybe we're playing on hard. Maybe some of us are playing life on Legendary. I hope everyone aspires to that. The truth of the matter is, though, the level that you climb in life, whatever that is for you, is going to be predicated on how many previous levels you were willing to get feedback on, and use that feedback to learn and to grow.
Life on Legendary, that would be a nice brand name.
Not bad.
I'd see that as t-shirts.
Right?
Yeah. So I will never forget when, I don't think a lot of people know this. For a while, when I lived up in New Hampshire by myself, and I was a bit of a recluse. I genuinely there were certain days where I didn't even speak to another human being. It was interesting. It was an interesting time in my life. I don't know that I understand yet what it all meant and where that fits in the grand scheme of Kevin. But one of the first things I did when I was coming out of my reclusive state is I went to a party of a mutual friend of Alan and I's. And this was before Alan and I were podcasting together. We were really just rebuilding our friendship, and I saw a lot of friends there that I hadn't seen in years. And we stayed up all night, and I remember playing, what's the trampoline ball game? Spike ball. I remember playing spike ball and can jam, and we literally played volleyball until 2 o'clock in the morning. And it was awesome. It was an awesome party. We went swimming. I nearly drowned because I shouldn't have been swimming while I was drunk. But this was, a few years ago, or 4 years ago at this point. And I'll never forget this. I was walking across the lawn, and there was these two girls that I knew. And I was just kind of flirting with them. And one of them said to me, "We would never go for somebody like you. You're way too short." And as you guys know, being short has always been an insecurity of mine. That definitely made it worse. And I remember the way I reacted. I literally said, well, I make more money than you or any man you're going to find. Ego. And I didn't really make that much money. So it's that wasn't true. But that was my response in that moment of insecurity. So my first point is when somebody gives you feedback that is something you're actually insecure about, multitasking, it's way harder. It's way harder when it's true. It's way harder when somebody knows what button to push. In that moment, that taught me a lot about myself. One, I got more feedback that I wasn't proud of the way I responded to that. Two, and something I take with me to this day, getting rejected, getting an insecurity highlighted in front of other people isn't nearly as bad as I thought it would be. I thought it was going to end my life if that ever happened. And when this happened, it wasn't that big of a deal. Now, again, I responded with ego, and I was drunk at the time. But the next day I woke up, and we slept in tents, which was I just slept in a tent by myself in a rainstorm, which was brutal. And the next day I had to go to New Jersey because I was still working that job. So I drove home, and I was thinking of this all day of what happened last night? And I was reflecting on it. And I just remember thinking it wasn't as bad as I thought it would be. I thought if I ever got rejected outright because of my height, I wouldn't want to show my face. I wouldn't want to continue doing what I was doing. I would have no confidence. And I think for me, it was almost like a piece of proof that, like, yeah, you got some really difficult feedback. This was a really difficult mirror moment, but the show goes on and it wasn't as bad as you expected. So in a weird way, I almost think my greatest fear coming true actually served me. Because it was like, look, is it really going to be any worse than that? Like, are you going to get worse feedback than your biggest fear? So that's my first point is, like, if worse comes to worse and you get that feedback that you're terrified of, like the one thing you don't want to hear, and you survive, it'll actually be a positive spin on the story, and you can use it as leverage in your future.
I think it's important to understand, too, that feedback is necessary for growth. You know, it's like no one is great out of the gate at anything. You have to get better and better and better. If you look at any athlete over their career, they had a bunch of coaches, and a coach's job is to help give them feedback, identify their blind spots. And also, we all know that when we were kids, we got a lot of feedback we didn't want. A lot of kids are very unapologetically them, and they say their truth. I remember when I was a kid, I would give people, I remember when I first found out that Santa Claus wasn't real and the Tooth Fairy.
What do you mean?
Got him.
If any of 7-year-olds turn this off.
Yeah, literally. The Easter Bunny, so I learned it all at once, right? Because I had a conversation with my mother, and I was like, wait a minute, what about the Tooth Fairy? Well, what about...
Shout out to Mom for keeping it real.
And I remember on the bus, my mom told me, do not tell your friends. Do not tell your friends. And I ended up going on the bus, and I told everybody. And I'm not honestly proud of this, because my mom ended up getting a phone call from one of our neighbors basically saying, thanks for ruining Christmas. Because I not only told my neighbor, I explained everything about the cookies and about the carrots and about how your parents like put them out and eat them and hide where they hide the presents. And in hindsight, I understand the Sherlock Holmes part of me. But here's my point. Kids give us a lot of feedback we don't want. And so growing up, we got a lot of negative and constructive feedback. I remember being laughed at for asking a dumb question in calc class, pre-calc, AP Calc, and that affected me so much. And I think what happens, this is what I think happens. I think when we're really, really young, we try to learn how to walk and we fall, and that's good. It's all good. And you get praised. Like, oh, try again, you get praised. Eventually you start getting into like kindergarten and then middle school and then high school and then college. And the more and more and more you try stuff, the more people make fun of you. And we get conditioned. We get conditioned to think that feedback is a bad thing. We get conditioned to think that a B or a C or a D is a bad thing, when in reality it's feedback that can be used to learn how to grow. See, when we succeed, we celebrate. When we fail, we contemplate. And so I have an example of this where I recently failed and I contemplated. So yesterday, today's Monday? So yesterday. So every single Sunday, Amy's behind the scenes right now, go to the studio and we literally draw 3 columns on the board. We draw Alan's essentials, both, and then Amy's essentials. And we basically get all the stuff that we have to get done, and we try to crank out like 4 or 5 hours in the studio of just productive work to set up the week for success. So lately, I just moved in with Emilia. We've got the new home going on, and I've had a lot of moving parts. This weekend, or last week, was actually my mother's birthday, and so on Sunday morning, Emilia and I woke up, we went and got my mom flowers and a card, and we went for a hike and a picnic. Wonderful day, wonderful morning, wonderful early afternoon. I ended up late to the studio, though. I call up Amy on my way. I say, Amy, how are you? And normally she's so excited to hear from me. This time she was not. And I was like, what's going on? And I kind of knew. I'm like, okay, you're upset because I'm late again. And lately I've been late because of all the house stuff and because I'm not as good at being on time as I want to be. So what we did is what I refer to as the 3 C's of belonging. Emilia and I have the 3 C's of belonging. They're very simple. Okay, number 1 is courage. Have the courage to admit the truth to yourself. So in that moment when I saw her upset, I knew, okay, she's upset with you because you moved to the time again and she's sitting there waiting for you again. Okay, courage to admit the truth. So I admitted to Amy, I said, listen, Amy, I'm really sorry. I jeffed it. I screwed up. I got to get better. Okay, so the second C is vulnerable communication. Once you admit the truth to yourself and then have the courage to communicate it, now you can do the third C, which is collaborative problem solving. So once I admitted the truth to myself, then communicated it with Amy, now we can actually work on it. We actually ended up talking. And I said, Amy, I think the root cause of why I'm late is because I'm so optimistic. I think to myself, it only takes a half hour to get to the studio from my house, but I don't think about construction. I don't think about how COVID has opened up and there's a lot more traffic now. I don't think about what could go wrong, getting gas, coffee, things like that. And so she said, yeah, that's what it is. And honestly, I always add 15, 20, 30 minutes in for things to go wrong. So she's a little bit more realistic than me. I tend to be more optimistic. Kevin and I, same deal. And that's okay. We're a good team because of that. And so I admitted the truth to myself, communicated it to Amy, said I was sorry, and then problem solved. And today, I was on time to the studio. And again,
on-time kid.
Thank you. This seems like a simple thing, but remember, some people are really good at being on time. Other people aren't as good at it. I struggle with certain things too, and this is one of mine, especially lately. And the key here is those 3 C's, is have the courage to admit to yourself what's wrong, communicate it effectively, and then solve the problem together. All of that was tough feedback. It wasn't fun to admit the truth to myself of I need to work on these other things and I need to be less optimistic when it comes to logistics and it comes to travel. But admitting that brought a greater end state. Not only are Amy and I closer, but Kevin and I will be closer as a result, and I'll get better as a result. But if I just hid from the truth the whole time and avoided the mirror moment, I would never admit the truth to myself and I would never be able to solve it.
Vulnerability is so important when you're getting and or giving feedback. If you're giving feedback to somebody, it's a huge difference between you're doing this and I feel this way. Like, it's just completely different when you're giving feedback. And then when you're receiving it, this, like, I feel a certain way versus egoing up. Like, I literally, in that example I used of getting rejected by those girls, I literally could have said, instead of egoing up, I could have been vulnerable and said, like, that really genuinely hurts my feelings. Like, I apologize whatever I did to you, and I hope it didn't make you feel the way you guys made me feel. That wasn't my goal. It's a completely different story. And just to put a bow on that, my story, I ended up seeing one of the people a few years later at a party, but I was completely sober. This person was very, very intoxicated, going through some stuff in their life. And it's like, it was just for me, I think that was like a beginning of a certain path. And for this person, I think they kept going down the path they were going down. So I think it's an interesting point in time.
Well, I think that's a testament to you taking feedback and using it to get better.
Well, I have a couple examples here, a couple of recent painful examples. One of my most painful examples of getting feedback, this was like a really, really, really difficult mirror moment for me. It was, I don't know, probably 6 years ago at this point, but my best friend texted me and said, hey, man, you never come around anymore. You only spend time with your girlfriend. Like, you never text me. You weren't at this person's funeral for my family. Like, you never show up. You're not the friend that I remember. And it was a difficult conversation. He was very, very angry with me. Like, to the point where I was afraid angry, because he is a lot larger than I am as a human being. And I had to sit with this because I'm like, again, naturally, my ego wants to keep me safe. And it's like, dude, screw you. Like, that's not true. But as I sat with it and kept thinking about it and kept talking about it with him, I realized very quickly that, like, yeah, he's right. I moved to New Hampshire with this partner I was dating at the time. I hadn't been very receptive on my phone. I hadn't been reaching out to spend time with him. I didn't ask him how he was doing. I wasn't there for him when he needed me. I just wasn't a good friend. So Alan spoke about this a little bit, ownership. I had to take ownership in that moment and understand that some of the feedback that I'm getting is totally true. I had to take ownership and apologize and say, hey, you know what? You're right. I've been a shitty friend lately, and I apologize for that. Like, that's not who I am. That's not my goal, but these are the things that I've been going through, and maybe that has, part of the reason. It's been part of the reason why I haven't been there for you. I think a lot of us, when we get feedback, we have one of two things we want to do. One, what I did at that party, and you try to hurt somebody back. When you get hurt, you try to counterpunch and you try to hurt them back. Two, you really start hurting about yourself. The third option is own it, take responsibility for the piece that is yours, and then try to, like Alan mentioned, vulnerably have a conversation of, yeah, you know what? I'm sad too. Like, I apologize that our friendship has this distance that we didn't want. It was very difficult. And that's something my friend and I still talk about, how I'm grateful he did that. because it gave me the opportunity to look in the mirror, but it also made me realize like some of the most difficult feedbacks, some of the most difficult mirror moments, and I'm going to talk about one later on in here, are not only the most true, but the most important for the trajectory of your life. Like if I didn't get that, I might be operating completely different in my relationships, in my friendships, in my life. So sometimes the pieces of feedback that hurt the most will actually be thank yous later to the people who gave them to you.
Well said, brother.
Appreciate that.
Absolutely.
I don't remember anything I said.
I didn't.
Seriously.
I didn't intend on talking about this, but while Kevin was talking, I had a moment where I thought about some of the most difficult feedback I've ever gotten. I don't know if it's the most difficult. It's up there, though. After my car accident at 26, that's the most difficult feedback I've ever gotten, was that, for sure. But it was like probably 6 months after that, I started really soul searching. And I forget which podcast or YouTube video or motivational video I was listening to, but they basically said to go out to all of your old friends and old colleagues and old family members that you don't spend time with as much anymore, and intimate partners as well, and ask them questions. So I remember I called a bunch of college friends. I also called my ex-girlfriend from high school. We met when I was a senior in high school, and I believe she was a sophomore in high school, and we were together for 4.5 years off and on. And so that's a really critical chapter of my life. And I remember over 5 years after that. So if I was 26 during my car accident, this is 27. So her and I met when I was 17. She was 15, I think, or 14. And we're talking again when I'm in my mid to late 20s. And I asked her, what are some of my blind spots? And that wasn't the exact question. I think it was like, what did you notice about me? What did you observe about me? And one of the most difficult pieces of feedback I ever got, and I've shared this on the show before, but I think it's important, is that I never, ever used to talk about my dad. She told me, like, you and your family would just never talk about it. Now, my extended family, my dad's side of the family, did talk about him often, especially when I came around because I look so much like him and a lot of my mannerisms are like him. But my father passed away in a car accident when I was 2 and he was 28. And Alyssa, my ex-girlfriend, she basically said, like, you and your family just avoided that topic. Like, you never wanted to talk about your dad. And I always noticed that, and I always thought that was strange. And after that, I really started to dig into why that was. And the truth of the matter is I was avoiding the pain. I was avoiding feeling the pain of that loss. And I don't know if we ever fully mourned that as much as we could have or should have as a family, and I'm not going to go down that road. But I do know that for me personally, it was always something that I didn't realize, but I avoided probably. And I think I understand why. I mean, obviously it's a sad topic, and whenever it would get brought up, it would usually be brought up in sadness and rather than celebration. And also it would make other people uncomfortable. For those of my friends who didn't lose a family member, they couldn't really relate, and so I get it. But that was one of the most difficult pieces of feedback I've ever gotten. But what's interesting and what's more important is that me having the courage to reach out and ask that question, 1. 2, her giving me that feedback made me contemplate it. Now that's such a huge part of my story. That's such a huge part of what motivates and drives me every single day, being the male role model that I never had. And if I didn't take that feedback and like really contemplate, I would not be the man I am today. And that's a fact. And I think that's really important.
Can I add to that real quick?
Of course, bro.
So this actually ties in. Beautiful story.
Oh, thank you for the story.
Hello, my name is Dr. Tarryn MacCarthy, and I'm host of the Business of Happiness podcast. When I met Kevin and Alan 2 years ago, I had no idea of how much impact they would have not only on the success for my business, but also on my life. They've given me enormous perspective and true strategies, true tactics to take in my everyday business plan and in my life plan to make an even greater success. Kevin and Alan, thank you so much. I couldn't even begin to express my gratitude for all you've done for me. And if you're looking for similar mentorship, I highly recommend these incredible experts at the Next Level University.
This actually ties into one of the points I had written down. When Alan and I were in Colorado, one of the speakers in the middle of his presentation said, I want every single one of you to get up right now, Like in this moment, I want you to go outside. I want you to call somebody that you love, that you care about, that you trust, that you value their opinion. And I want you to ask them what your blind spots are. I want you to ask them for legitimate feedback. And everybody did it. And I did it and Alan did it. Now, I won't share what mine was because I will. I mean, basically, one of my buddies said, you always claim not to care what people think, but I think you care more about what people think than you admit. And it's like, yeah, that's probably true. Like, that's good feedback. That's probably true. But imagine if you did that. So when you're done with this, or even right now, I want you to take out a notebook, not if you're driving, and write down 1 or 2 people who you feel safe getting feedback from. And you can reach out to them and you can say, I was watching this thing in this Facebook group, or I was watching this thing on Facebook, or I was listening to this podcast episode, and they said to reach out to somebody and get feedback. And I value your opinion. I know you want what's best for me, and I trust that you'll give me valuable feedback. You'll give me a positive mirror moment. And do what Alan did. Take the positive out of it, take the perspective out of it, and then figure out what to do with it. I think that's one of the things that we all know we're screwing up somewhere, and I think we're afraid to get that answer. Because a lot of times I think we personalize it. And I know that we've talked about this before, where a lot of times people won't tell you the truth of what's actually going on in their life. I think that's why. I think it's a heavy mirror moment of like, what's Alan going to say about this?
Right.
We always joke about like when I'm playing Call of Duty, and it's a joke now, but like I think that's a mirror moment of like, yeah, you're screwing up your future a little bit. You know what I mean?
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Kevin's getting vulnerable right here. Yeah, so just a little context to that is like Kevin and I will coach the same people, and we've run into moments where they'll tell him things that they don't tell me.
I'm the teddy bear, I guess. And they just tell me different things than they tell Alan.
And I'm, telling them one piece of advice, which is like, you got this, go harder. And Kevin's like, no. Like, I think this person's having a harder time than they're letting on. And again, I think that maybe I don't make people feel as safe as I would like, or maybe I'm intimidating or whatever. I don't really fully understand that yet, so I'm not going to teach it here. But one of the things that did come up for me is a story of Emilia and I. We were heading to her family has a house on the lake in Otis, Massachusetts, and we were headed there. And I remember she turned to me. This was early in our relationship. I think this was probably 6 months in, or something like that, going on 2 years now. And she asked me a question. I was driving, I remember. And she's like, what do you think is my biggest bottleneck to my growth and impact in the world? And I remember being really uncomfortable with that question, because I knew I had answers. And now it's interesting because I've been with her long enough to where I know that she like wants those answers all the time, and we kind of coach each other in many regards, and that's actually awesome. But I do think that in the past, people have asked me questions, and then the truth has been too much. Or I probably gave them feedback they didn't want or didn't need or whatever. But I ended up telling her, I said, sweetheart, honestly, you don't have enough solitude. You allow other people to trample on your life, and you have these huge, unreasonably high aspirations, and I love that, but I don't think you have enough solitude of like focused work by yourself. And again, that's just another piece of feedback. But the key point here is, are you asking the question? Like, I ask Emilia regularly, and she would attest to this, like, what do you believe from an outside perspective is my biggest bottleneck? And she said things like, honestly, you handhold too often. People have to learn their own lessons sometimes. Like, you can guide the way, but you can't hold their hand the whole time. Like, a lot of the growth that I've experienced in the last several years has been Emilia giving me the feedback. But that's also because I've asked the question. And when she did give me the feedback, I didn't attack back ever. And that's the important piece, is you're going to stop getting... Okay, real talk. Who here knows someone, anytime you give them any level of truth that's a mirror, they get very upset with you? Okay, that person is getting very little feedback because no one likes to upset other people. So if you're that person and you're constantly getting upset with people who give you feedback, rather than taking it in, sitting with it, and making your own choice, you're most likely not getting feedback, because people know energetically that they're going to get attacked if they ask, or if they tell you, rather. So if you want people to tell you the truth, you have to be willing to accept the truth, and they have to feel safe to do so. And I think that's a piece of this that I didn't intend on talking about, but like I feel very safe talking to Kevin about the difficult truths, about what it's like to grow and scale a global business. Why? Because I have a track record with him where he can handle it. I don't want to hurt him. He doesn't want to hurt me. But if we want to grow a global business and have a holistic self-improvement podcast that changes the world, of course we're going to have to be like, yo, maybe Call of Duty isn't doing that. And that doesn't mean he has to not play Call of Duty, and that doesn't mean that I can't watch movies whenever I want. But at least we can talk about it and say, dude, if you knew how much money and profit and impact and profitability, I said profit 3 times there, impact, mastery, and profitability we were leaving on the table, if you knew how much our business was suffering in the long term by those hours. See, no one likes to hear that. I love video games maybe even more than Kevin. We were actually watching a stream, and I got so pumped about Call of Duty. I would love
we had to turn it off. I almost lost Alan. I was going to go right out the window.
Literally, I went back to my old days. But that's my point, right? So as business partners, you have to have a certain level of trust, and you have to feel safe to bring the truth so that you can collaborate. So are you asking the questions? And more importantly, are you making others feel safe to give you the truth? But also be careful. Don't get feedback from people who really don't have your best interest at heart. And that's an important caveat.
I think it's important, too. I think this is an understanding. I was thinking of this when I was walking up from the bathroom. And I was like, honestly, I'm not going to write this down. I want to see if it comes up. If it does, I'll go there. I think the level of feedback that somebody is ready for is based on 2 things. 1, their self-belief. 2, their goals. There's a reason Alan literally said this to me today. When are you going to start dieting? Because I was like, I've been dieting. He's like, when are you going to like actually start and like really do it? AKA like you look like crap. No, I'm not saying that's what you're saying.
Okay.
But Alan knows like my level of ambition when it comes to fitness, my set point is just higher than many people. So that feedback is like a joke to me versus somebody who might have body image issues. That might crush them, right? That might crush them. Me showing up at your house and saying like, hey, you're not a very productive human being. Like, you need to get your shit together. For somebody who is depressed and just trying to get out of bed, that might be too much feedback for the level that they're at and their level of ambition. So I think that's an important distinction of like, Alan and I give each other very hard feedback. And Alan and Emilia and Tarryn and myself and the team and clients, like that's a different level of feedback. If this is something you're new to, particularly giving it and or receiving, I think it's important to kind of, I don't want to say filter it, but understand, like go to the place of where the person is before you deliver it. So Alan and I, we said we were going to talk about this, so let's do it. Alan and I recently were sitting in these spots, and we were lucky enough to interview Stephen Kotler, which a lot of you listen to, and we get a lot of good feedback. I believe it's the next book in Book Club. Shout out to Book Club. And at the end of that interview, I remember saying, when we got to the end, we were talking about being 4% out of your comfort zone. Because that's what Stephen Kotler talks about. It's proven that's where the growth is. And I remember saying to Stephen, I said, yeah, this was like way more than 4% for me. And he said, why? And I said, because I'm not like you and Alan. Like, I'm not neuroscience, years of studying, books, author. I'm just not like you. And after that interview, I kind of leaned into like, I'm just a regular guy. And again, nothing against regular guys. That was just a story that I was telling myself because I felt like I got way too much feedback during that interview. So I kind of hid behind that. Again, nothing against that. That's just not really who I am. So Alan sat me down in the studio one day and said, hey, man, and don't ever do this. Hey, man, we need to talk. I feel like I'm having this fear that I'm going to outgrow you. You've been talking a lot lately about just being regular, and I know that's not what you mean, and I know it's not a bad thing, but if you want to have the level of impact, if you want to have the level of mastery, if you want to have the level of profitability you and I have been talking about for the last 5 years, if you want to have a podcast that changes the world, if you want to accrue millions, potentially billions of dollars, it's not going to happen if you're quote-unquote a regular dude. And we were sitting here, and it was literally like, naturally my ego flares, and it's like, what is he talking about? Like, that's not true. Or he couldn't do this without me, or I started it, whatever the BS is that comes up. And I sat in it because we've done this so many times. And him and I started going back and forth about like, well, why? Like, why is that happening? And I was like, well, I'm not like you. Like, I don't know that I could ever be like you. Like, you're different than I am. And like, we went back and forth on that. We rumbled on that. Well, different isn't a bad thing. It just means that we're doing things a little bit differently. So Alan and I sat and we rumbled with it for what's probably an hour, a very, very long, uncomfortable conversation because it was a lot of feedback. But we got to the point at the end where it was like, I think we were crying, both of us, or at least me, maybe both of us. Yeah. And I hugged Alan. I was like, I love you, brother. I appreciate you sharing that with me. I'm getting a little emotional. And I think it's a deeper understanding that, like, the people, and I said this earlier, the people who give you the hardest feedback are usually the people who care the most. And Alan has an understanding of what success will take, and I trust in that. And you have to. You have to, and I've trusted it since the beginning. So it's like, don't be afraid. Thank you. Going back to what I said, Alan knows my level of ambition, and he knows how much I have in here, how much I want to help people. Alan would literally be doing me a disservice by not telling me the truth, especially since we're business partners. Like, look, half of Alan's success depends on me. Not actually, but in this business, it does. So I think it's also having the empathy of, like, what was Alan feeling? Like, I'm sure Alan was scared. Like, what if I outgrow Kev? This isn't going to happen anymore. I have a history of outgrowing people. That's painful for me. So I think that moment was as much feedback for Alan as it was myself. For sure. But I'm grateful for the way we both handled it. And again, it was difficult. And I literally went home questioning everything of, like, can I even do this? Am I smart enough? Am I good enough? How do I go see Alan again? But it was like, let it settle. The feedback settled. And it was like, yeah, honestly, I've been listening to the radio more than I usually do. I haven't been learning as much. Like, I haven't been as focused on mastery. I haven't been as focused on being productive. So it was the truth. And I got my crap together. And here we are 1 month later, and we're back in love.
Really well done.
More than a month, but
a lot of that is difficult to share, but it's important. And I was just as scared as Kevin was, because in that moment, you're either growing together or you're growing apart. And that identity of I'm a regular dude was definitely creating regular actions and regular thoughts and regular beliefs and regular and I saw this happening. And it scared me. And I caught it early so we could talk about it, so we could grow together and not apart. You know, a lot of people told Kevin and I not to be business partners, but I think the truth is they don't have the level of character or communication that Kevin and I do. And the vulnerability piece too. And I do agree with that. And so that's just really, really important, is living in the truth. There's people who are truth seekers, and there's people who are truth avoiders. And we've all been both at times. And it depends on the area, too. Like, if you're insecure about fitness, you are a truth avoider in that area. And I've been there. Trust me. When I was drinking often, I did not want to look at that mirror of, like, this is affecting your fitness goals. Right? I didn't want to look at that. And so the key is to find your blind spots. Remember, the gold is buried where you're not digging. Again, the gold is buried where you're not digging. The people who love you and want what's best for you, like, I'll tell this story too. This will be brief, because I do think that I've always tried to have others' best interests at heart, even if it was me being the messenger. Remember the Spartans used to, or was it Persians? They would kill the messenger when they went back to say they lost the war. I feel like I've been a messenger, and I definitely feel like I've been villainized at times for that, even though I was trying to help people. And a lot of times they don't know that I was trying to help them until later. But anyways, so there's this one person, I'll keep it anonymous. She was in a lot of debt, school debt. Wonderful human being, super hardworking, achieved many of her dreams, but in a mountain of school debt. And I've been there. I had $84,000 worth of debt when I left school, and that was less than this person. And so she's struggling to pay her debt. So I helped her consolidate her loans and get some of that rolling. And she ended up buying like a fairly expensive Jeep. It's like $19,000. Again, anonymous. And I remember everyone congratulating her. Everyone was like, oh my God, love that Jeep. That's amazing. Hell yeah. And I remember I sat her down and I had a conversation. I said, listen, I don't want to be unkind, but the truth of the matter is that was not a smart financial decision. And she's like, why can't you just be happy for me? And it's like, because I have your best interest at heart, and I understand that that was a mistake because you have so much debt that you're trying to pay off, and that is not a cheap car. That was definitely bought at a premium. This is really hard to hear, but it is the truth. I made at the time well over $150,000 a year, and I was driving a $4,500 car. and I paid off all my debt, my school debt, in 1 year. That was a hard choice that I made, but it was a smarter choice. Now, this person, I had a very vested interest in their success, and I wanted what was best for them. And the truth of the matter is that maybe I didn't always approach the truth from the best angle. Maybe I didn't always say the right things or do the right things, but I do know that feedback changes lives. Just make sure you do it with kindness, make sure you do it with character, make sure you do it emotionally regulated, and make sure you do it with the right people at the right time. With Kevin, that story, it's hard to even hear because out of context, people might take it wrong. But the truth of the matter is we're business partners, and we got to live in the truth, and we got to do that if we want to grow together. So where are you avoiding feedback? The gold is buried where you're not looking for it.
And again, just to reiterate, like, Alan knows my goals. Like, when we say we want to have the most successful podcast of all time in terms of, like, the self-improvement industry, like, that's what we're playing for. We're not playing for a podcast that gets to 500 episodes and we're like, that's good, or that's not what we're playing for. I have to become the best in the world at what I want to become the best in the world at. Like, that just is what it is. So it's not that we have anything against, like, doing regular stuff. Like, that's not, we don't have anything against that. But, like, I won't get where I want to get if I do that. I've tried it. It doesn't work. So the feedback is necessary, and I think it's in direct correlation to the level that you want to play at. Okay, last story. I'm going to tell a quick one. You may have seen this, Alan and I, before we had the live podcast. We had the meetup, and we had, what was the other thing we had? It was a meetup, mastermind. We had, when we were doing the meetups, we had our good friend, the amazing, and our client, Dr. Tarryn MacCarthy, on here, and she talked about self-empowerment. And her Wi-Fi was jeffing because we were using, I think we were using StreamYard at the time, maybe. Mm-hmm. But her Wi-Fi was jeffing. And throughout this entire presentation, I was literally losing my mind. I was getting so much feedback of, Kev, I don't know if you helped her enough. She's a client of yours. Like, this problem should not be happening. Like, this Wi-Fi issue is minuscule. Like, it's super easy to solve. It shouldn't be happening. So the entire hour presentation, I was literally losing my mind. We got off of it, and we had to tell Dr. Tarryn that, hey, unfortunately, we're not going to be able to use that at all for the podcast episode because the audio and the video were both jeffed. I'm sorry. And I said, like, it's my fault. I should have known better. And in retrospect, there's nothing I can do about the Wi-Fi. And she obviously took full ownership because that's the kind of person she is. But she literally said, all right, what if I just redo it right now? Like, after wiping tears off her face, what if I just redo it right now? I'll just sit down and do it. And she redid it. And it was better the second time because she had a little bit of practice. Fire. And the quality was awesome. And we were able to release it as an episode. And everything worked out just fine. The point I'm making, why does the feedback actually hurt? So, like, Tarryn's Wi-Fi jeffing wasn't anything I did directly. It didn't hurt me because I wasn't the one doing it. But I felt like I should have been able to help her at a deeper level. That's something I take very seriously with my clients. I know tech better than most of my clients. That's why they hire us, right? That's why they're working with us. So it was very painful for me to see her, quote unquote, failing forward because of something that I perceived was my fault. Again, we've talked and everything is great. But I think it's an important distinction to figure out, like, why does this feedback actually hurt? The calling me short hurts me because it's my deepest fear. The Alan saying, I'm afraid I might leave you behind, hurts me because it's my deepest fear. That's a common theme, but it's not about the feedback. It's about what you do with it. And if you're continuing to grow and evolve, the feedback you get will be more productive and more constructive, and it'll help you more every single time.
Very last thing I'll say, we'll move to Q&A. Fire, by the way.
I appreciate that.
Absolutely, man. So when I talk to Emilia, I'm always saying, I'm not sure if this is your mirror or mine, but let's rumble. Let's contemplate. Let's figure this out. Like, there have been several times. I remember we were talking about quantum physics, and we had this disagreement on a belief system. And it turns out I'm actually reading a book now, Dr. Joe Dispenza, and I talked to her last night. I'm like, actually, I understand what you were saying now. But anyways, a lot of times when I go into these conversations, I go in with humility of, like, this might be my mirror, not yours. And I do that with Kevin as well. Like, I might learn something here.
Those are my favorites. When it's like, he'll come to me and be like, hey, man, we got to talk. And then at the end, he's like, that was my mirror. And I'm like, hell yeah.
Yeah, literally.
Tragedy averted.
Which, by the way, that's how you learn. So go into it from a place of curiosity and from learning. We actually just, on book club last Saturday, we did the law of curiosity from a book called The 15 Invaluable Laws of Growth. It's a law of growth to be curious. And so if you go in with curiosity and with love, you're going to learn something. Maybe it's your mirror, maybe it's their mirror. Just make sure you're willing to have the conversation and do it with love and kindness, but also be strong. Okay.
Okay, I'll just save this. I'll do this after. Okay, before we let Amy in, I just got to adjust her microphone settings. Amy, no stress. Everything's going to be just fine. Let's see. Audio. Get rid of that. Bada bing, bada boom.
Got some question.